I want to first introduce our moderator here, and who's going to be Anne Altman, the Vice President and General Manager of IBM. And I have to say, I could probably go on for pages and pages of introducing all the accolades of Anne Altman, but I'll just say a couple things. When there are transformational issues in our industry, as well as within IBM, Anne has often been tapped to take a leadership role. And we're very privileged to have her, so please give me a warm welcome to have her moderate this panel. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. All right, am I on? Can you hear me? So thank you for that lovely introduction. Totally unnecessary, Greg. I'm really excited. I sat in a little earlier. I've read the report. I sat in on the first panel, not completely because I wanted to connect with this panel, which is going to be very lively and exciting. And we're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities related to big data. So to start, I'm going to introduce our panelists, but to start, I just thought I would frame a few things that you've probably already heard this morning, but that would give us a context for the conversation that we're going to have over the next 45 minutes or so. The first thing, and we all talk about this, is what is big data? It's the new natural resource. We all recognize that. It is unmatched today. We talk about the volume of data, 2.5 quintillion bytes of data being created. That is every single day. So much so that 90% of all of the data in the world has been created in the last 2 years. So we understand that, and we understand that unstructured data is everywhere, in every sensor, and every possible thing. It's on your wrist, it's in your car, it's in your refrigerator, it's, you name it, it's there. And so as we're thinking about that unstructured data, and we're thinking about how to make things more intelligent, how to make things work, we recognize that that data is coming from all different sources. And so earlier today, someone said, well, what is the definition of big data? And there were a couple good answers, I thought. And I would say it is the convergence of unstructured and structured data. That's what big data is, the convergence of those two. And that sounds very simple, but what is powerful is the promise of what that can do to change society, to change economic competitiveness, to improve healthcare, to save lives, to speed the processes that today are slowed down by the challenge of all the data that exists. And it's that, I think, this panel is going to get into conversation. So I feel like we are moving into an era of prosperity, an opportunity for economic development and economic prosperity for the world as we tap this very exciting new natural resource, big data. So, and I would just add one more thing, which is our responsibility. You're here in this room because you are interested in this topic, because you understand that this has tremendous potential and impact for this region and for this country and for the world. And so it's our responsibility to understand that and embrace it and then take action. So let me get on with the panel because I'm not here really to be the one that shares all my views. So I have a very esteemed panel, a wonderful panel, and I want to, and it's a great mix too. So it's a great mixture of skills and experiences and talent. So they're going to share that talent and their personal perspective. Sitting to my left is Mike Bradshaw. Mike and I go way back. We started together in industry, although he reminded me just a little while ago that he started a few months after me, so, oh well. Mike is the director of Google Federal, and of course, Google is synonymous with data. We all recognize that. It's certainly synonymous with the access of data, innovation with data, self-driving cars. I would like one of those, and especially in this area, right? Then I wouldn't have to worry about commuting anymore. I could work while I was commuting, and Google Glasses. Now, next to Mike is Don. Don Brown, and I should say Dr. Don Brown, but Don, who is the Director of Data Sciences for UVA and the Professor of the Department of Systems Information Engineering. So a data scientist, an entrepreneur, I think, and has a great deal of perspective about how this will turn into an economic conversation for the prosperity of this region and the country. The next gentleman down is somebody that probably needs no introduction to this audience, Anish Chopra. We all know that Anish was our first CTO of the United States of America. But following that, and all of his leadership and I would say his encouragement to move us forward, to move us faster. Today, he's the co-founder of Hunch Analytics, and he's bringing his passion of public information and regulated sectors together to say there is an opportunity to create business and to create value at the intersection point of public and regulated sectors. And then, last but certainly not least, is my new friend, Justin Langseth, who is the CEO of Zoomdata. Now, what I love is to have a president and CEO of a smaller firm that is moving at lightning speed and doing really creative things around data. So he comes with creating business intelligence for this mobile generation, and we all get this. This is about how fast we move and capturing data, presenting data, and making it useful on a device that we carry around with us 24/7. So that's the panelists. I wanted to share my perspective and introduce them and then get right into the meat. So if you feel like I've missed anything about you individually, have at it. But, so I have a set of questions, and we've already discussed that we are going to go wherever we want to. This is going to be a fun and interactive panel. But I want to start with I'll start with the report, because you all have had a chance to thumb through it or read some of this, and of course it was presented. And the research in the report said that 87% of the firms that responded have active or planned big data projects. And so the question I have is, where do we see the biggest opportunities for companies in this region around the Washington metropolitan area? What is the biggest opportunity for big data? So shall I just start to my left and I'll ask Mike?
Sure. Thank you, Anne. And thank you again for having us here today. As Anne said, we've been around for a little while in the industry for about 30 years, but I went to Google because I saw some great consumer technology that made so much sense for the federal government, particularly as you looked at big data. Now, the challenges are still there as far as trying to get newer technologies into the government based on regulatory issues, policy, privacy issues, but I think there's a huge market here for the current group of the industrial community that focuses on federal, that is helping to transition the government with big data and how they use it. There's a pretty good market around public data, getting that public data out in a different way, cross-agency data, sharing environmental data with weather data and getting that out. I think the more exciting area for this region, and it's much tougher, is where you're going to take these great new consumer technologies, great new smaller companies who have a different way of approaching data, and getting that used by the federal government quickly. I think we're going to take smaller steps, and it's going to be a big industry for quite a while. But I think the most exciting part is to take a smaller company like things like Zoomdata is doing and looking at that government data in a very different way.
Justin, maybe you could comment, since you're on the other side of this, right? Bringing innovation quickly, rapidly to this region. Maybe for federal government, maybe for others.
Yeah, you just used the words government and quickly in the same sentence, which kind of caused
and
me
he
to.
laughed.
I was like, wait, what's going on here? Yeah, so government and quickly together. So I'm very focused on startups. So I was a founding member of Next Gen Angels, which is a local angel investor group, mostly of entrepreneurs who kind of exited companies under 40. And we're looking at startups like one in particular called Fiscal Note that we're about to look at investing in, which is like taking government data, particularly around bills that are not passed yet but might be passed, and they're predicting whether or not bills will pass. and not just federal bills, but like throughout every jurisdiction. So all kinds of lobbyists on K Street would love to know which people to go lobby to get certain bills passed. So that's, government data that's hard to get. And there's a little startup founded by a 23-year-old focused on trying to make a company out of taking that government data, figuring out how to extract it, which is hard, and then doing predictive analytics against it and then selling it. And so I think a lot of the opportunity in this area is getting data from government, which has always been hard. We have data.gov. I think somebody around here knows a little bit about that. But my experience with like data.gov is I go there and it's like a lot of small data actually. I poke around like where's the big data, and maybe I'm missing it. And where's the real-time streams of data? Like where's the good stuff, right? And it's kind of hard to find. So I think a lot of our opportunity in this area is around that kind of stuff and getting startups to focus on trying to make money off streams of data, the new oil. I think getting government itself to use the technologies is a slow process, and I'm not sure it can be made that much faster. There's things like In-Q-Tel, which I think somebody here knows something about as well. And there's lots of government kind of programs trying to make things faster. And a lot of times they're kind of a lab in a little building in Herndon or something, and they're not necessarily kind of connected with what's really going on kind of in the mission side. So I've been involved in people trying to make government get technology in faster, but it's been a little bit frustrating actually trying to make those processes actually work.
Well, maybe we could ask Anish to comment on not just the federal and data sources, but Anish and I had a conversation a little earlier about all the industries, and certainly whether it's healthcare or cyber, there are tremendous opportunities in this region for companies that are focused on big data.
So I see the foundation, of course, being providing a vehicle to sell this capability back to the government, but that's a very basic, obvious point for everyone in the room. There are really two vectors it drives off of, which is there will be new products and tools that, because of the areas in which we operate, we could spin off as separate commercial capability. So tooling for big data and working with the kind of the R&D agencies, National Science Foundation, others who are investing in new tooling to support big data applications, that is an area of growth. But the part that I'm most excited about is McKinsey had done a study about where job growth happens, and it happens in markets that have more productivity growth. And then they looked at sectors of the American economy that lacked productivity growth to suggest that if they became more productive, there would be more jobs. And they identified health, energy, education / skills. What is common amongst those three sectors? They are public and regulated sectors of the American economy. This might be a little bit of government as customer, but it's a heck of a lot more of government as arbiter or as owner of data that at some point will be released in more machine-friendly form. And if we had a leg up on understanding that data and how it, in combination with other data, could create value, this region might create these super startups. Let's just take Climate Corporation. Raise your hand if you're familiar with the story of Climate Corporation. Are you kidding? This is a company of 30 engineers. All they did was consume government data, not the uncool stuff that you're playing around with. They consume weather data, census data, and other open databases. They used machine learning to develop algorithms to better design crop insurance products for farmers. And they insured the risks that mattered and ignored the ones that don't. That product was so successful, this team of 30 sold to Monsanto a few years after their birth for $1 billion. Now, in this community, we're familiar with selling at 1 times revenue. And that's frankly whatever, okay? What really matters is $1 billion on 30 people, okay? And O-Power going public at $1 billion, essentially repurposing open data, which essentially is regulated data that is compelled to be made available, customer energy usage data, right? So what I would say is, I say this to all my friends who work in government contracts, don't worry about the next RFP. Look at the data you're sitting on from the previous contracts you've been doing, and figure out what's the commercial value of the data you're already sitting on, because you know more about it than anybody. Take advantage of your position, and we should be spinning off O-Powers and climate corporations like water, and this region will see tremendous GDP growth. That's my opinion. I hope it's reflected in the study and that we just released it. I hadn't read it, but I assume that that's in there. Chris Chamorro, where's Chris Chamorro? Okay.
Yeah, well, thank you. And so Don, coming from a slightly different perspective, where you're working with firms and of course you're working to produce the talent that will be in these firms, what do you see as being the most substantial value of this region and the product that we're creating?
Right. So, it was interesting because I did get here in time to hear some of the early discussions, and I did actually read some of the report. And I found it kind of curious because to me it was actually a little schizophrenic with regard to academia. And by the way, I forgot to say at the start, thank you very much. I'm from the University of Virginia, and I realize this is a GW event, but thank you for having me here. I feel a little bit intimidated by all that, but thank you anyway. But I think that when I read the report and when I listened to the discussion this morning, it's a little bit schizophrenic, as I said. In some ways, the report was very complimentary to academics. They like what we do and they like what we're trying to do, but they say, oh, but you're doing the wrong things. You're not getting people in the right areas fast enough. Well, all I can say is one of the advantages I think this area offers, at least the academic institutions in it offer, is that we're pretty flexible in terms of trying to understand the needs of industry. We're very interested in doing that. The program we have at UVA is a broadly interdisciplinary program in data science. It is not, despite some of the discussions earlier, it's not statistics, it's not computation, it's more than that. It's lots of different disciplines. We frankly have discovered that we learn a lot about visualization from these folks called architects. They've been thinking about visualization for a long time. When we combined a biomedical engineer who was looking at angiogenesis and the vascular system with some architects, they said, oh, you know what, we've got this incredibly difficult network we've got to model. The architects are going, network model, we've been doing these visualizations of these complex networks called cities for a long time.
Yes,
and you know what, it was great. It was a merger that really exposed a lot of visualization ideas that neither side had ever thought about before. That's the kind of thing we like to see in this interdisciplinary exchange. And that's something this region has in its academic institutions and can take advantage of. The other thing is that we are very open to working with industry in terms of internships and projects. We love that because we too have a hard time getting the data. So it's great to get those kinds of things going. It's wonderful. The last thing I'll mention is we're very interested in spin-off kinds of things with our students. I'll give one example. We have a company that spun out of UVA, and one of the students in the last year and a half took some work that they did. This is an example of your tool making. That was the lesser of the two you liked, but it's kind of a neat example. And that what they did was they had these projects with NGA, and they said, you know what, the thing that's missing in these Hadoop kinds of environments is we don't have an indexing system for these geospatial data. So they built something called GeoMesa. It's open source. You can Google it, and you can find it. And it's an open source system that's available that does indexing. And frankly, it's been picked up by a lot of folks. It's become the standard in a lot of government programs, but it's also been picked up by some commercial folks as well. So we're very interested in seeing that kind of success. And I can name off about 5 more, but I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, this, just as we're talking, it reminds me, and we've touched on this a bit, which is that we talked about next-gen startups. We talk about the capitalizing on existing data. We've talked about some of these new business models. And when we think of big data, if you think of it as a natural resource, if you think of it like oil, then you would come back to the point that there's an element about prospecting, and there are certain business opportunities around prospecting that's the collecting, right? There's the refining process, and that's another set of opportunities. And then there are the services companies that actually help the users of that data. And so maybe we could take that conversation a little further, because we've introduced a lot of ideas, but in this region, and since we're talking about this region, do you all think that one or another of those areas is more likely to help create the the data capital of the nation right here? Is one of those the industry that will take off?
Can I offer a friendly amendment?
Sure.
There's a fourth dimension, which is to take those services and to productize them so that they can become part of a product or service that's made
Fair.
available more generally. And frankly, I think it's that fourth bucket that has the most potential for economic value. You know, one of the tensions is a lot of these areas like Climate Corporation is a lot of economic value, not a lot of jobs. So there's a slight distinction between what's to maximize jobs versus what's to maximize economic value. And I think and it depends on how you frame the question. If you want to be the data capital, you can measure that by the number of FTEs who work on data projects. And I think we're going to have a good number there because we do a lot of services work for government.
Sure.
But if it's GDP or gross regional product per capita as the definition of the concentration of talent for the value created, it's really the race to create those products. And I think that is the business model challenge, the opportunity. Let's just take the president's big data report. Have any of y'all seen the president's big data report?
Yes.
Good. One of the headlines is that if you go back to the sectors of the economy that really haven't seen productivity gains, the ones I referenced, health, energy, education, the ability to prospect, using Anne's words, is severely limited in privacy policy.
Yeah.
So you can't just mine student learning records data, even though mining student learning records data could give you insight to say a student who looks like this, if they are given this Khan Academy lecture, they're going to have 3x the output on their scores.
Right.
So you can't prospect because you've hit this rule wall, which is the privacy policy. So this region, more than anyone else, can sort out, is there a path forward? And in fact, that big data report suggests the path forward, which is shift the movement from notice and consent to use, which basically means if schools start inviting parents to download electronic copies of their students' learning record, which we announced through the Open Data Initiative is the My Data program. If we start encouraging folks to adopt the My Data program, third-party apps could then ask parents, share that file with me and I'll personalize your Khan experience for your kid, just as an example. And that is understanding the region's regulatory as well as operational climate and understanding where to prospect and the rules to extract that value, I think is where you're going to see a great deal of innovation, especially in those areas that need it most. We've got to fix health, energy, and education, and they all follow the same roadmap.
And maybe that's the definition of data fracking, like taking data
Yeah,
that's hard to
Yeah.
access,
great, I
right?
like that.
That's a great line. Hey, tweet that, data fracking.
You heard it here first, folks.
Data fracking,
So
unlocking the power of data in regulated markets.
Exactly, right? So
I
the
love
easy
it.
data is like, there and it's already being processed is the hard data. How do we get the hard data? We have to frack it. And the technologies mostly which come from California, such as Hadoop, which some of you may have heard of, they were started by Yahoo and companies out there who, say they care about privacy, but look at FTC's Snapchat thing that came out the other day, right?
Yes.
So a lot of these technologies that we're adopting from the open source world, that privacy and security is like not only an afterthought, it's like not a thought at all in a lot of cases, because initially they were used internally against internal data, and the philosophy there was everybody has access to everything. Then you try to take these technologies and use them over in this side of the country, and you run into these kinds of legitimate and unlegitimate, to some extent, problems. And so I think, like you said, if we can build technologies that help us kind of frack that data while respecting to the right extent those privacy and security, but not being completely hamstrung by them, I think there's a lot of value. Maybe that's what unlocks a lot of this value that we're talking about.
I know Don is
I
passionate about this.
Yeah, I am.
Can I get a master's in data fracking?
We'll put that on the curriculum. Yeah.
We
No,
will become the nation's, the data
Leaders in
capital,
data
right?
fracking.
Because we're going to.
Absolutely, brilliant. That's a brilliant line. I love it.
So,
Do a startup for data.
So I really like this analogy. We have a company. It's actually it's another one of these spin-offs that came, frankly, out of the business and the education school. But it was a data-oriented company, and they were interested in looking at K through 12 data because every state, every community is dealing with how do we judge performance, how do we do this kind of thing, and nobody's doing it in a truly scientific way. The problem has been the data is just a total mess. A total mess. These guys have come up with a very clever way of doing that. They've got a way that basically, what they did, the short story here is that they created a language that allows you to frack the data, if you will, to put the data together and describe rules that are visible. So when, hey, Johnny was only in the school for 6 months, you can't count him for the whole year. that kind of thing. You look at those sort of things, they get the data on the background. This kid came from a broken home. You get all that kind of information, and you can actually do the studies now. They can look and they can see. But the cool thing about it is that out of it came a language for doing this kind of manipulation of data. And you can take a good data scientist, you can teach them the language very, very quickly. They can turn out a study in a matter of weeks instead of 6 months is what it used to be, in order to try and get the data to the point that they needed to have it. Because they've taken the notion of fracking, if you will, they've taken the notion of trying to put all this messy data together in a visible way. You can see the rules. So if somebody questions you and says, what the heck, where's this result coming from? Why the data being stripped out this way? You can actually see it, it's visible to you, and you know what's going on.
And none of this technology is particularly new. Like there's, we've been calling it business intelligence and data warehousing in the past, and then suddenly somebody came up with big data, and our job was cool suddenly.
Exactly. It's sexy.
Yeah, but,
Yeah, and I'm going to take a slightly different turn on this too. We all love the new cool stuff that's going on. I think another huge growth area for this place is looking at the transition. So a quick story about Google exec was doing a presentation, and he had a counter going in the upper right corner of the screen, just clicking, nobody asked about it. At the end of his presentation, maybe 20 minutes, the counter hit 250,000. It was the number of processors he just allocated internally to a DNA sequencing project. Clicked it on, ran the sequence, boom. Something that normally would take hours, days, weeks was turned around in about 10 minutes. And I think the big industry here is figuring out how to transition three things. We've got to figure out our approach to data, because we typically look at old data and look in the rearview mirror. If you look at big data, a lot of the government stuff is looking back, not looking forward. It's not combining government data with commercial data. And coming up with trends. Fraud detection at CMS is a great example where they've done stuff like that, predicting ahead. The technology, again, people aren't using these incredible resources the way they could, except for the cool applications. But the government could take advantage of some of this when it gets too sensitive, pull it back behind the firewall. But there's so many great things out there right now. So we have a new approach to data, new approach to the technology, and the big one is the culture. So if we can get some of the integrators now to look at how are they actually going to approach government projects, and some of this is failing fast. That's one of the most important things. Don't create dashboards, don't create reports that we've done in the past. Let's look for some information we want to find that's going to be durable for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, not a report we're going to create that we keep going back to for the full year. And that's, I think, the real power of big data.
Mike, Ann, can I just
Sure.
amplify this? So Mike raised an extremely important mindset shift that I would like to just double down on. So he referenced Medicare's fraud detection program predicting.
Right.
Brilliant. But that was a traditional government contract, meaning CMS wanted a service. I assume put up some procurement mechanism, good or bad, don't know, I wasn't involved. But it is a process where the government was spending for outsiders to come in and give them that predictive tool. The same CMS took the same file and made it commercially available through a program called QEHP. You don't get paid, you simply have the right to data frac. And it's meant for private companies to consume the, basically it's the linked ABD claims file for those that do healthcare work. It tells you essentially a snapshot on the state of play in American healthcare, which doctors treat patients in what way or the other. And the QEHP program says, take this data plus whatever proprietary data you have and give the American people a tool to help them predict which doctor is right for them to treat their condition. And you can, there's limits on what the commercialization rules are, but raise your hand if you in this room have got a QEHP contract. The current public list shows not a single company in Virginia on the list, meaning we only seem to think about the procurement RFP, fedbizops.gov stuff,
Right.
but the QEHP opportunity, perhaps more important, no offense to fraud detection, important that it is, but like to solve the $1 trillion healthcare challenge means if every patient got the right care at the right setting at the right time, we save 30% on the dollar, right? Forget the fraud issue, just that. Who's building the tools to help predict and to navigate patients to get to point A? who's commercializing QEHP and why is not a Virginia-based company on the mix? You're all bidding on the fraud thing, right? So you have the engineering, you have the talent, but it's mind-blowing to me that you're not on the list. And so this is my anxiety, and forget, that one requires a contract. Medicare also did a small version of the file that they just open sourced, which is how much they pay doctors. One of the big insights was that a big chunk of expense is when you're a cataract patient. Some ophthalmologists inject you with a $2,000 drug. Other ophthalmologists inject you with a $50 drug. NIH did a study and said they're clinically the same. So an interesting question would be, hey, which ophthalmologist tends to favor the cheaper one versus the not cheaper one? And what information, who's built that tool on that open data that was released in March? So I just want to make sure that we have in the mindset of this room, turn off FedBizOps.
Yeah.
I hate FedBizOps. I hate the name FedBizOps. Exploit opportunities in the larger setting and see if we can give that a run for the region. Because I think we can crush this area and lead. And that's just healthcare, Anne. That's just Medicare.
So, you know, I really like the way this is heading, because part of what you're describing is taking big problems, which we would say have longitudinal data. So lifetime learning, population health, things that now, the policy issues aside, right, the data is there. And if you capitalize on that, instead of being reactive, which is what we typically are, oops, the data is showing us something, we better go do something, we can become prescriptive or even more importantly, predictive. And so then the intervention occurs and somebody doesn't drop out of school, somebody doesn't end up back in jail, somebody doesn't end up revisiting the emergency room because they didn't take their medication. So I think you're absolutely right. It's that data that exists, and it's for all of us to really think creatively about how we can engage and which companies can come together and new opportunities. So in the context of what you all have been talking about, there are other states, there are other regions in this country, Massachusetts as an example, who think they should be the data capital of the nation. Well, we are the nation's capital, so I think it's only right that we become the nation's data capital.
Amen.
So talk about that. What is going to distinguish us? I mean, why this region will become the data capital of the United States? Any of you?
I don't want to monopolize this, but just to give you an example, this is taking an active, not passive role to the opportunity. So we've got to, if you believe health, energy, education are huge growth opportunities, that's just a hypothesis I've put on the table, and the McKinsey data supports it. But let's just assume that. What is this region doing with its hospitals, Dominion Power, Pepco, and all the schools to be capable of fracking? So just to give you an example, my daughters go to Arlington Public Schools, and we've got a superintendent who's the superintendent of the year, and I asked the superintendent, we had a conversation about big data and education. So we just concocted a little bit of a project, which is we married up every child in the school database, tells you if they're tardy or if they're what their grades are, or if what disciplinary problems. But when they take the state standardized exams, that sits in the state capital of Richmond, which is a Pearson database, which has question level detail. The 3,000 questions every kid takes between now and when they graduate. So we asked the superintendent, hey, let's mash up the data, right? These are two government agencies. Can you blend the data? And can we create a competition to invite the public to mine for, can I cut the dropout rate in half by predicting them much earlier based on the responses to answers to questions earlier in their career? So the answer, Anne, is asking the superintendent of Arlington to do that. We put up a competition. I don't know if any of you in this room are competing in that competition. Anyone participating in the Arlington Big Data competition? Cricket? Seriously? Okay. So anyway, hopefully someone is involved. But the point is, we've kind of released that. And Dominion committed to green button, so anyone working with Dominion to open up their energy utilization data to help small business owners lower their energy costs through energy efficiency. They've made that pledge in Virginia. Hospitals like Inova and Virginia Hospital Center are all working on various ways to open up data using Blue Button and other techniques. I'm sharing this with you, Anne, because we can't be passive, like wait for this stuff to sort of RFP our way to win. I think we need to actually ask our neighbors and friends, hey, you're a local principal in the school. Do you mind if we do something to help, even as a prototype, to show that we can do something and then we can commercialize? Or ask the local hospitals, or ask the utility company. In just those sectors, financial services is another. You could ask Capital One what they're doing. We made all the customer complaint data for every credit card in America open source, so you could say which credit card company handles complaints better than others, and that's another big data set. I think we need to start proactively throwing hypotheses on the wall and then leveraging the collaborative of the community to say, who can help test this? And then we test, and then we validate that there's something useful, and then hopefully it scales into a billion-dollar corporation with 30 people.
But so,
Let me counter that too, though. And again, this is where I'd love your ideas. So what differentiates this region versus Massachusetts or California? You know, kids want to go to California. In that area, everybody can do exactly that. What do we have here that we can capitalize on? That's why I keep going back to this kind of transition. We've got great industry here, people with great subject matter expertise, just doing things not the way we want them to.
But we know the policy, Mike, they don't.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So let's take advantage of the people who have that government expertise to transition and maybe build a data reputation around here, around that as we're transitioning. And then I agree with you, healthcare, education, energy are the way, places that are great. But I don't know if we've got anything here over any other part of the country. That's what I'm struggling with.
Well, let me suggest two other areas, since we've been focusing on the ones that you started with, and they're good. But I mean, frankly, we want a competition for manufacturing. And as a guy who came from the West, this is stunning to think, because Virginia's never had the biggest manufacturer. I don't know if anyone knows, but the biggest manufacturer for years in Virginia was Norfolk Shipbuilding. That's what we built. We built ships.
Yep.
And but
Still do.
and yeah, we still do. But I mean, it's like you look and you say, this is not a place known for manufacturing. But Rolls-Royce picked us. Why did they pick us? They picked us for a lot of reasons. A lot of it was, now I brag about our academic institutions because they cited them, and of course our president, whenever she speaks, will cite that, and we want that. But they also did it because of the economic climate that's here. They did it because of the small business climate that's here. They did it for a lot of reasons. And frankly, this is an unbelievable opportunity for folks interested in data science, because the amount of data that are pouring out of the manufacturing community right now is immense. And guess what? The traditional manufacturing communities have yet to catch up. They're not used to that. They don't know how to deal with it. We can leverage the idea of the policy component because policy is back into it. But we have Rolls-Royce and GE now talking about placing things in Virginia in advanced manufacturing. Why? Because we have an environment that is very conducive to that kind of thing. I'll give you one other one that you may not be thinking about. I could do the same thing you're doing, Anish, but I won't. About how many people know about the Panama Canal expansion? But
See? No, this they know. This they know.
oh my God! All right, that's great. Well, what that's going to mean is, guess who's going to be the East Coast hub for a lot of containers? Norfolk. We are going to be the place where the big container ships come in. If you are all interested in this area called logistics,
Yep.
which is a huge, and admittedly, there's all sorts of businesses, but guess what? Virginia can offer a very important contribution in this area, in this multimodal transportation and logistics.
Yes.
With that expansion, that is huge for us.
I agree.
That's another
That's
big
another
advantage
great
we
one.
got.
Just
So,
one quick
Justin,
thing.
yeah.
One thing I found that works is going into kind of lacking a ton of technical universities kind of in the immediate region right here. I found going to the local high schools, to the computer science, AP computer science classes, and just going in there and saying, hey guys, if you can figure out how to take data from here, put it in Hadoop, then put our technology on top of it, like I'll literally hire you as an intern right now. And we have on our website a challenge that we give to these high school students. And
brilliant.
we call it the Kobayashi Maru Challenge. For those of you familiar with Star Trek, it is literally impossible. So we find the people who figure out a way to solve that challenge, and we actually bring them in from high school, and it's worked.
That's wonderful.
That's awesome.
That's
That's cool.
wonderful. So I'm being a bad moderator. I got so excited about all the conversation that I lost track of time. I have no idea if we are completely, so we should transition to the wonderful audience and open up for questions.
I wanted to follow up about culture and the culture, situation around big data and open data. I think we're all very interested in this, obviously, by attending, and we have a lot of thought leaders and people who are involved in the community. But the big aspect is that if there's something that goes wrong, even just a small portion of it, there's a huge reaction, right, from the public, or something that says, okay, now we got to retrench. And so we got to find ways to have this community and folks to be able to evangelize having, changes or adjustments to private data policies, and just saying and being able to communicate that it's an asset and we need to be able to get beyond some of it. Obviously, we need to protect data and make sure it's protected from if it's private data. But a good example is VLDS. You have to do a double de-identifying process in order to get to an answer. And so that's very expensive. And I think that if there's other states out there with less regulation around data, is that they'll have a leg up, is that we'll have to spend more money to do certain things to get to specific answers. And I think that as we are able to pioneer and go forth, we have to talk to the folks that make policy. We have to evangelize and make people comfortable and make them part of the process. I think that's another big thing, is to make sure we identify the right stakeholders to talk to around this and make sure that they're involved in the process, that they feel comfortable, so we can press forth and go beyond some of the boundaries that stifle some of the things that we're trying to do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, one of the things that our institute has is a Center of Excellence in Ethics, Law, and Policy. If we're going to get ahead of these issues, I should say it this way, we need to get ahead of these issues. We've got to make sure we are viewed as the thought leaders and not the followers. Oh my God, another Snapchat thing happened. We've got to be aggressive in getting out and showing that we understand the issues. And they're not easy. These are hard things to think about. So a month ago, we had a conference on this very thing, and people are all the time saying, oh, the younger generation, they're not as concerned about privacy as the old. That is a bunch of baloney. In fact, what you discover when you get thought leaders in the room talking about this is they're as concerned as anybody. They just know how to use technology better to protect themselves, and they understand how technology is used in the sense of privacy. And there's a gap certainly there, but we need to understand these issues. We need to bring them forward. We need to formulate policies proactively. It's kind of the proactive version of the data, but we have to proactively look at the ethics, law, and policy issues and not be followers in this area. It's critical if we're going to succeed. And frankly, that's another area this region could be a thought leader in.
There's other countries out there too, and maybe they're going to have less restrictive policies around data, and maybe they'll get advantaged by those policies eventually.
Yeah, that was my point, peer pressure, actually.
Yeah.
If you look at geospatial technologies, what we did 10, 15 years ago, they were non-existent, and right now we all depend on them daily. Right. I think the peer pressure from the commercial group, what you guys are doing in the smaller, more creative things, puts a big pressure on the government, and I think that's good for us.
I just want to be slightly counterintuitive. New York State tried to do just share the data, and we create this database called InBloom, and it's going to make everything great. And families revolted. So I do not think this is about bulldozing over rights. The big data report tells us exactly what to do. Ask people permission. So if Netflix can ask my permission, or if Apple TV can ask my permission, whether it can access my Netflix private secure rental records history, and I'm involved in that process, and it takes about 1.5 minutes of my time using OAuth, we should be able to do that in schools and hospitals and with our utilities. That's a lot of what the report talks about. Engage the consumer in permission, and then you're in the clear. It's the stuff that happens. The reason the VLDS has to be double-blinded is no one is opting in. Right. It's all happening, without your real knowledge and consent. So they have to put like Fort Knox level rules because they didn't ask anybody's permission. Okay, and I championed that project before leaving to go to the White House. I love that project, but permission matters, okay? We just got to make permissioning easy. That's the Kobayashi-Maru test. Can you get people's permission to liberate data. And I think you learn by experimentation, and you ask patients in healthcare, you ask students in school, and you ask utility customers, would you be willing to share this if it brings something valuable to you?
With the default being yes, and most people just.
Well, I mean,
That's a debate.
that's
but
for
let's
sure,
get
though,
smart
right?
If you push the button, you have to
Let's
push
get smart about it.
In the retail environment, everybody's saying yes today, right? I mean, you go in
Just
somewhere and you say yes,
Yeah,
and
awful.
so, other questions?
Yes, Brett Berlin from George Mason University. One of the things that we have to understand, and this is a really remarkable panel and a good mix today between the academia and the industry and things like that, but the real issue is it's not about data science. We need skills in data science, but it's not about data science. It's not about big data. It's about the problems that need to be solved. And we tend to focus on all these technology things. There's lots of inventions, but those don't solve problems. Technology doesn't solve problems. People solve problems, and that is the advantage we have in this area. We have people that every day they're looking at the mission problems in the Defense Department and health and energy and all that thing. They're struggling with these data privacy issues. But it's because we have a plate full of real problems that need to be solved, and we know those problems that need to be solved, and that's where productivity happens. So I think we have to train students and train companies, not to look at Fed BizOps, but to put teams together, which I call Renaissance teams, where they're not just data scientists or statisticians or whatever, but they are people who understand the times and know what the problems are to solve, and then we have a passion for solving those problems, and we will create productivity and levels of multipliers that the world has not seen in the last 10 years.
Amen.
You just defined startups too, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, startups within big companies too, like same philosophy.
Look at the president's announcement today. He's going to announce sort of a redoubling of the efforts to make energy efficiency work in buildings, okay? There are people who wake up in the morning, go to bed at night at GSA, living in this community, who are thinking about all the techniques to make buildings more energy efficient.
Right.
To your point, sir, if you had those folks who've defined the problem, sitting side by side with folks who are collecting that kind of real-time smart grid metering, sub-synchronicity things, Synco phaser, whatever. You've got all the technologies spinning off data, and you've got the problem. You'd sort this thing out. We did a competition at the EPA, and we said who can cut their energy bill for the building the most, and the winner was a dorm room at UNC Chapel Hill. And what did they do? Of all the things that they did a lot of stuff. Solar, this, that, and the other. None of that made any difference. 90+% of their 30% savings came from one IT project. They combined their census data, which is when the kids, key card in, they know exactly what the occupancy rate of the building is, with the controls data for the HVAC system, and they set an alert. If occupancy falls 60% to 60%, we're going to allow the building to float a few degrees up or down, depending on the circumstance. That one rule cut 30% or 90+% of the 30% of their energy bill. So to your point, sir, someone hypothesized, is an expert in the building, looks at where the data is, mashes it up, and puts that solution together. That is a startup that'll make $1 billion with 30 people.
Yeah, brilliant.
So go start companies. Yeah.
That's-
In fact, what I tell my students is innovation, invention is what you do with technology, with all these technologies. Innovation is solving problems. We do not have innovation unless
At scale.
we solve problems.
Great.
Justin Tinsley, I'm with Verizon, a solutions architect, and I deal in something that I'm shocked that it hasn't been mentioned, but I deal in machine-to-machine and connected devices, which I think ultimately leads to where the most growth and most data will come from moving forward, with the projection of 60 billion connected devices by 2020. So I plan everything from smart grid, telehealth, telemedicine, telematics, digital signage. I know we talked about opt-in just a minute ago. Europe and Asia are years ahead of us. Everything is NFC, RFID, so people with their smartphones opt in to more digital signage on the street, and all of those retail places collect that data, and that's how they market and how they sell their product. So just wanted to get some insight from you guys as far as how you think, and certainly IBM, Google, all of you play in the same field we do. How do you feel machine-to-machine and connected devices are really going to change not only big data, but how we analyze and how we use that and the growth in the next couple of years?
We're really focused on Internet of Things and being able to do as much of the analytic at the edge as close to the data as possible, like ideally inside your wireless network or inside the thing itself, like the airplane, or inside the wristband or whatever it is. Trying to do as much work as close to the data as possible. The Internet of Things is going to be generating, we think the data is big now. It's nothing compared to what's coming with the Internet of Things, and it's real and it's happening today.
Well, I'd like to make a comment, even though I'm the moderator. So, because of course, that's exactly what we see, this connection as the Internet of Things. But it's also the fact that machine learning and what we now call cognitive computing, so the ability to teach, rather than program, will completely change how computing occurs, the speed at which it does, and the problems that we can solve. And it will happen from experts who will then have the ability to train the system in their domain, health, education, whatever. And the sources will be from all of these things that are coming so fast together. So it's a very exciting prospect.
We're really hopeful Watson works on something other than Jeopardy, because it's really exciting.
Yeah, well, it is. It's doing a lot
I know.
now.
Just as a statement more for our convening power, whether it be the NVTC or however we do this, let's just sort of connect some dots. The good father here shared with us the brilliance of logistics and the shipping opportunity. Yeah. Internet of Things will play an important point on security and logistics and retailing. Yeah. So what would happen is, oh, wait a second, should this young man who's got passion and talent, enthusiasm, talk to this brilliant mind, who then together approaches the port of Hampton Roads or the team in Norfolk and say, hey, is there a pilot project to experiment worth let's get smarter on it. That, to me, when Anne asked the question, what will it take to be data capital, it'll be A plus B and C, engaging public and private resources to really unlock opportunity, and that will create, I think, you might create a company out of this that Verizon might want to sponsor as a sort of corporate spinoff, all around optimizing supply chain on the massive new chips.
That's great.
That's what we need to do. I don't know who's doing convening around this and how we organize, but it seems to me not doing that means that we'll lose that opportunity and that edge, because that's the one edge we have. There is an expert who understands port logistics who lives at some department of transportation down the way, maybe living in Ashburn, and wants to be a partner in that conversation. And that just uniquely here, we can set those things up, but we've got to set them up.
Yeah, that's what I agree with. We've got so much subject matter expertise here. How do we get those people who are solving those problems, as you said, to merge with the people who really know how to use newer technologies and these tools? That's a great thing for us in this area.
Perhaps this is the right place to close our panel, because what we've just discussed here is that we need to create opportunity to convene like this forum today. We know that collaboration and sharing ideas, and you heard that kind of dialogue here and throughout the room, is so crucial. And then it's crossing boundaries, not sticking within our own swim lanes, but working and reaching across the boundaries that are going to make the difference. And so I think that's really what today is all about. And if we do that, there's no question in my mind, we will be the data capital of the United States.
Good
Plus,
job,
we gave
Anne.
you a great tweet.
I'm with you, Anne. Lead the way.
So thank you to this wonderful panel.
Wow, a big thank you to our panelists and our moderator here. Terrific. I got to tell you, I'm just thrilled. And to kind of pick up the dialogue here on the rich expanse that Anish certainly shared with us here. I just want to say a special announcement that NVTC will be forming a committee which we invite anybody who's interested in participating to continue this dialogue. I mean, like Anish pointed out, and every one of the panelists about the opportunities, there are a few challenges along the way. And if you want to continue this dialogue, this committee, you need to reach out to either Allison Gilmore, who's right over here. If you don't catch her right now, you can reach her at her email address, which is, think of Agile for AGILMORE at NVTC.com. NVCD, yeah, that's right, you're an org. We want to commercialize you real quickly, so. In any event, I also want to just say a quick thank you to George Washington University for hosting this terrific event. So, and with that, I'm going to invite Ali back up here.
Thank you, Greg.
Should we move?
No, sit down. At this point, we invite you to throw your tomatoes at the panel that we distributed earlier. Thank you so much. I would like to thank all of our academic partners who have taken the trouble to come and drive here and be with us. University of Virginia, obviously, Professor Brown, and others who are present. Secretary Fornash is here, who's now affiliated with the University of Virginia. Our friends at Virginia Tech and also our other friends and colleagues at the George Mason University who have contributed tremendously through their participation and also sponsorship. And all the other sponsors, including IBM, SAP, and others we have mentioned earlier. I am really gratified that you all took the trouble to come here. Our own people from GW, professors, Division of IT, and others who are present here. I thank them for the role they played, and the staff here who have helped us with the organization of this committee, as well as, of course, NVTC. I look forward to having you all back here, hopefully, in a series of other types of symposia and workshops and conferences that focus on this very important topic for our region. Thank you and have a great day. Bye.
Stanley said it's not one of you.